Aloha, and this is our presentation on our ʻŌhina 3, which is about Kalokuokamaile and his writings. So the choosing of this topic, so just as a review, our first two topics were Kahuakaʻihele a Liliʻuokalani and the letters to Lucy Peabody. And while we got so much from these ʻŌhina, one of the things that we wanted to do in regards to translating Kalokuokamaile's articles is that these articles that we translated were written by Kalokuokamaile himself. He was the writer, whereas the articles about Liliʻuokalani were written about her huaka'i, and the letters in the Lucy Peabody collection were letters that were written to Lucy Peabody. So we got to hear from the author himself in this particular ʻŌhina. We were interested in his and attracted to his relationship that he had with his land and the way that he expressed his knowledge in his articles, the depth of his knowledge about the Kona districts, which is his homeland, the breadth of his topics. He was an educator, and so he talked about a wide range of topics, which we will take a look at, and also his use of language. He was one of the kupuna of his time who really was a bridge between his kupuna and the next generation. So that was some of the reasons why we chose this topic. Following slide, please. So a little bit about Kalokuokamaile. His father was Na'ili Pohaku Kahi, his mother was Kawaha, and his name was Zapena Panea Kalokuokamaile, ZP Kalokuokamaile. He was born March 13th, 1950. Some accounts say 1850. Some say 1849 in Napo'opo'o, Konahema, and he passed away on September 1st, 1942. So he lived to be over 92 years old. He attended Lahaina Luna School from 1872 to 1876, and he was a school teacher at Ke Kulaupuni o Ke'e, but this really only scratches the surface of what he was involved in and the types of knowledge that he had. But really, he was an educator. Through his articles, we learned so much, and they offer a lot to this generation and the future generations because of the knowledge that they have. So, Aolani.
Mahalo, John. Aloha kako. In the next couple of slides, I'm going to be talking about our process or our ki'inahana, how we organized the work and distributed the work. From the very beginning, I think our priority was to be really thorough. Thinking about our first couple ʻŌhina, we learned that if we didn't have a nice thought out scope, that it was hard at the end of the work to kind of have an opinion about whether or not our searches or the work that we did do was majority of what maybe was in the newspapers or available in archival sources. And so we started off working really hard on narrowing our scope. So our scope for our searches was from 1875 to 1942. Now, the way we established this is, he is born in 1849, 1850. And when we did a simple papakilo search under Kalokuokamaile, we got back the oldest article that popped up was in 1875. So we marked that as the beginning of our ʻŌhina. And then he passed away in 1942. So that became our search scope. What we did is we did an initial search under Kalokuokamaile and just that name, because he does have different pen names. And that's what the graphic is up on the right. It shows that over several decades, we could see that he's very actively writing in some periods of time, much more so than others. So we were able to distribute the work so that each of us kind of had an idea of what he was writing about and the kind of things that he was interested in, in different time periods, rather than just assigning a chunk of time to each of us. And then it was easier for us to see like the breadth of what he was responsible for. So what we did is we took the activity based on the papakilo search and distributed by pretty much by 2-year increments when he's very active, and then larger spans of time when he's less active, and then just rolled it between the three of us. So all three of us were responsible for doing searches to try and find things that he is mentioned in for the years that are in the chart on the slide. That way we didn't overlap, but yet we could make a really, really good effort to be thorough in our searches. And so that was a goal of ours from the beginning. Kaliko, next slide, please. One of the things that came up right away was that he's known by so many different names. He has what we were calling pen names in the beginning. And then of course, so these variations, we started to track them right away. So what we did is we began to do our searches as a group, just like really quickly for about half an hour to 45 minutes. And just in that real short amount of time, we started to add to the list of search terms that we were finding. And we tracked it in a document. So as we continued to pull our documents to fill in our spreadsheet, we would go back to this parent document and add in variations of things that we were finding as we were looking through the years we were assigned. So these are some of the things that came up. And then what we would do is I could, if John or Kaliko added terms, then I would go back to the years I completed and search again by the variations in terms. Now, some of them are pen names, some of them are OCR like issues or errors. Some of them are just, different ways to look at, his abbreviated names. It was really interesting because that's kind of how we got a really high yield on the searches that we did early on. So with the time that we had and the number of search terms that we had to use, we ended up populating our spreadsheet with 208 entries. Of those 208, we translated 82 articles and 230 pages of the Google Doc text, the side-by-side text. So I think that, reflecting on the process, I think we improved our process for sure in ʻŌhina 3. I think that if we would have had more time to even doing the searches during the translation period, and we were doing that, I think we could have definitely been a little bit more thorough. So I think there is, if we had more time, I think there's definitely more searching to do, especially with the variation of search terms, that number of spreadsheet entries definitely would go higher. And we're working strictly off of Papa Kilo and didn't look at documents that would have been outside of the newspapers that were digitized at that point. Yeah, Kaliko?
Hi, aloha nui kako, mahalo, Awaiaulu e John, me Aolani. So this article we sort of stumbled across towards the latter part of our ʻŌhina, actually just the last week of translations. And there have been kind of a little bit of speculations as to if ZP Kalokuokamaile was all of these people, the names that were printed with these different variations of his name. And so finally, we've actually come across something where he professes himself that he is Kalokuokamaile Kawaikamai Kamako Kaopua Leona Noho Kuahiwi. So again, just to elaborate a little bit on what Aolani said about the naming process. Through our methodology, we had to constantly go back and throughout our ʻŌhina had tailored that list to add on names or tailor some of the search terms, because as we were going through the newspapers, we found more names or more variants of Kalokuokamaile's name. So some of the most valuable pieces of this ʻŌhina, in our opinion, is first and foremost that ZPK Kalokuokamaile is a jack of all trades. He really has a diverse background, like John was saying earlier. Not only his schooling at Lahaina Luna Seminary and his time as a teacher in the public school system, but also just being a kua'aina of Napo'opo'o and knowing the history of that place. And like those of the turn of the century, the 20th century, he was a preserver of knowledge. He was meticulous in documenting things of Napo'opo'o, of Kona, of the districts of Hawaii Island, actually, more widely. We often at times discussed whether or not Kalokuokamaile was an anomaly, meaning was he one of a kind, or was there a group of them in Napo'opo'okona? Was he having tea with Stephen Deshay, and were they just talking stories? It just made us wonder who else is out there with this kind of knowledge. And the two last points here are for the value of the Keep Up database and perhaps providing some materials for the Kaiapuni classrooms for the different lexical items. Here is a picture of ZP Kalokuokamaile by Ava'a, and he wrote an actual article that's on this page concerning the different parts of the Kalaiva'a. And just a little bit more for the classrooms, also just the kinds of meticulous details. And John is going to speak a little bit on the way that ZPK Kalokuokamaile writes and the nuance of his language is something that we could teach Olelo Hawaii speakers. So John, ya oino ya.
So Kalokuokamaile, you know, he was a teacher, right? But through his articles, you can really see the way he feels that education is really, really back a couple. Let's see. So this really just so he's an educator, and teaching and sharing information is really, really important. And these are just several titles. Tried to get a kind of a wide range of the breadth of his articles, and you can see by these types of titles how there's place-based knowledge. There are ka'au, there are olelo no eau that he shares. This is one of the top, pehea e kuai kapanako Hawaii. I mean, there's so many areas and contexts that he writes about. And it was just so interesting to see how he's so learned in so many different areas. But, you know, to reflect, remind, and revitalize seemed to be some of his mission through his writing. Next slide, please. So I know it's a little bit long, but I want to do a short reading because this is an excerpt from my favorite article from the ʻŌhina in terms of the way he expresses just the beauty of his expression through his writing. And it happens to be about his father, his father and the passing of his father. And it's the honorific type of obituary that he writes. And so if you want to follow along in the Olelo Hawaii, starting from up at the top, Iku'u Ho'i Ana, I'm just going to read. And this is him sharing about his father. And the reason why I want to read this again is just because it shares it honors his father, and it talks about the type of knowledge that came through his family and through his kupuna. So here it is. Upon my return from Lahaina Luna School in 1878, sometime thereafter, my father insisted that the two of us go upland to build a canoe, and I agreed to do so. He said to me, "Let's first go up in search of koa wood." The two of us went up into the mountains of Kahauloa, trudging through ie vines and akolea ferns. It was exhausting to search for koa. Once found, we headed back down for blankets, clothing, food, and adzes for hewing koa. Upon returning upland, the bark of the koa tree for the canoe was the first option for shelter. If 4 large pieces of bark are obtained, that suffices as a shelter for 2. My father told me, people who dwell by the shore always have to look at the clock, but there are 3 things to wake us from our sleep. In the evening, there is a land shell called the kahuli. This is its song, kahuli aku, kahuli mai, kahuli le ula le akolea. And when the song of this shell ceases, the polole land shell sings with a chirping sound. And when it's done singing, it's almost dawn. Then the elepaio will sing, and this is its song, holokalio, holokalio. Then it sings, onokaia, onokaia. Then dawn fully breaks. I did not get any sleep that whole night because I wanted to experience this, and I saw for myself that it was true. My father and I stayed in the mountains of Kahauloa, Kealakekua, and Ka'avaloa to carve canoes. Despite the injuries to his body, my strength was just a fraction of his, which was a striking force and did not keep to a single course of action. Because we trekked through the forest, I became aware of the various plants of the mountain and their 270 names from the mountain to the shore, as only the expert canoe builders know the plants of the mountain. My goodness, when I reflect upon my father in those solitary and uninhabited mountains, populated only by the song of the birds, it takes my breath away. And I wanted to read that just because it shared just the beauty of his writing and how he honored his kupuna and wanted to push some of this knowledge into future generations. Next slide, please. One of his other kind of missions through his writing, we feel, was to remind. And so you can see just by these two little snippets, I'm not going to read them, but he would be constantly kind of sharing olelo no eo and wise and proverbial sayings. He would share epithets from his homeland and how it related to the weather there and how that impacted the growing of kalo and the gaining of water. And so he was always kind of sharing these little nuggets of knowledge that hopefully to remind and then in turn inspire the current and future generations to learn some of these things. Following slide, please. And then to revitalize, he saw the state that the Hawaiian language was in as he was getting older, and he wanted to really paipai the younger generation to learn the language and not allow it to disappear. And he also linked some of his historic and traditional knowledge to the knowledge of the Bible, as he was a pretty consistent churchgoer, and he was involved in the church, and I feel like he tried to bridge some of his traditional knowledge to some of the biblical knowledge that he received, and tried to relate that to his nohona and the nohona of his people. Next slide, please. Kaliko.
Okay. No, definitely. Mahalo, John.
Yeah.
So what we're looking at here, at least in the articles that we were able to gather and populate our spreadsheet with, are a list of the mo'olelo that are listed in that that particular set. I've abbreviated the titles, obviously, but I think that all of us, when we look at this list, it looks really familiar. Like these are mo'olelo that we've heard of before, perhaps read before, which is really interesting. I think that that's part of our interest in looking at the mo'olelo. We're kind of to find out whether or not these are variations of mo'olelo that we're already familiar with, or what might have influenced him to print a number of these mo'olelo again in the newspapers during times that he was active. For me, I was interested particularly with Lono Ika Makahiki. So can you turn to the next slide, Kaliko? The reason for that is I've been like, just personally, my takeaways in being able to look at like a multi-pukana mo'olelo would to be able to get some experience in translating these types of things. And so what I did is I took Lono Ika Makahiki and I did several pukana in a row for several weeks just to get the experience of translating that type of narrative. That was a major takeaway for me, to be able to take a shot at it and then have my group get their feedback, and then to have the time with Kumu to coach us into how to improve, how we handled certain passages and the challenging language that comes with that type of narrative. Also, our group was interested in improving our mele, our handling of mele in translation. And by picking a mo'olelo, we were able to handle mele as well. So those two things were perhaps the major takeaways for me in terms of my translation learning. Outside of that, in terms of mo'olelo and just looking at Lono Ika Makahiki, I learned that there are variations in his narrative. For example, some of the parts are slightly different than Fernander's version. Now, I did not do a line by line or even pauku by pauku comparison, but there are certain sections in Kalokuokamaile's version that where there's like these awkward jumps. So when I couldn't make out what was happening, I would maybe go into Fornander's version and check out the way that section was handled. And often I would find lines missing or maybe a pauku missing. Not very often, but crucial transitions. It's easy to jump to see if those, assume that those are errors perhaps in printing. But I think that if you were to compare the mo'olelo and look at the like the ku'auhau of when these were printed and by whom, that you might be able to have pull away a much more comprehensive look at why those sections are different. I did not do that, but some of them are really interesting, and I wonder if they're intentional on his part. But generally, Lonoika Makahiki is very, very similar to the Fornander version that that is printed previous to that. Another thing that we had a number of discussions about was this term kakauia. And this was something we talked to Kumu about. It was in our group discussions quite a bit. I mean, it's pretty obvious that well, each of the mo'olelo that he's printing in the newspapers or writing is signed as such, kakauia e. And obviously he is influenced by text that is existing prior to this. So it really challenged us to pick the right type of word or have the right type of perspective on really what kakauia means. I mean, I think we commonly do translate it as written, but we in no way feel that he was trying to represent himself as the author of these things. But really, what does it mean to put your name on something that is at least easily accessible decades maybe prior? There is quite a bit of time that passes between the last printing of these mo'olelo in the newspapers and other publications and the time period in which he's printing them. So we're curious about this, and we had a lot of discussions about it, but we did not land on any kind of specific theory or specific handling of kakauia, but we definitely will continue to think about that, and especially if it pops up in other work. So, okay, Kaliko.
Hi, so something that I wanted to bring to our attention this evening is Kalokuokamaile's sense of place and the mo'olelo that he chooses to document in newspapers that he chooses to write for. And so we see here that Kalokuokamaile chooses to publish some of these mo'olelo that are specifically affiliated with places in Hawaii. You have the mo'olelo of Kapunohu here in the top left corner in Kohala. The Ho'onaneo Kumanawano Ke Kuhaupio, rather famous story for Hawaii Island, as well as some other Kalaipuni, Kalaihina, etc. And it sort of goes on as well. So La'i, Kawai, and Umi, the mo'olelo of Umi, as Aolani had mentioned. But also, so as I had mentioned previously, Kalokuokamaile is adamant, a staunch preserver of the knowledge of his land. And in his obituary that we translated in Kahokuo, Hawaii writes that Kalokuokamaile served on the board as the role of, and quote, "Kamea ike ika mea pohihihi." So the one who actually had known the obscure things, and he was sitting on the board, the publishing board of Kahokuo, Hawaii, before he had passed. And so also he was a prolific, rather voracious writer of nane in the newspapers, specifically in the ku'oko'a. He was renowned in the ku'oko'a for the different kinds of nane that he would produce. So if I could start you folks on the right-hand side of the screen, there's really a diverse set of nane, and I would advocate for bringing nane back to the math classroom. Kapapa maki makika. Here, for example, in the third question on this, on the right-hand side, a man had fell from an airplane and he landed in A'ala Park. He was falling for 32 seconds. How many feet did he fall? I mean, those kinds of things that we could implement in the Lumipapa in the Kaiapuni system, I think would be totally worthwhile. In the center here, I just showcased this nane because in the first part of this nane, he talks about the object that he is seeking is the alpha and the omega and the thing above all things on this planet. And although it seems as though one quickly gets the answer, the first answer is always never the right answer for Kalokuokamaile riddles. He's also not only writing riddles, but he's also corresponding with other riddlers in the paper. So here on the left-hand side of the column, here's Paololo Boy's riddle. I'm not sure why this. Do you guys see this problem? Shucks. Total buzzkill. Oh, here it is. Now where are you folks? There you folks are. Here we go again.
Yeah, there you go. We share.
Okay. So, not sure why these other slides aren't loading, but it doesn't really matter. We wanted to leave you with a riddle. We wanted to leave you with a nane. So inane mai. E ha'i mai ku wahinane. This is a nane written by Kalokuokamaile. He aha ka la'au hele pū me ke kanaka. I loa ai kia hea ka makani. O kukuru ia ho'i ka nani loko ke kahi mele hula peine. And he actually builds it on this last line of the mele because the other three lines have nothing to do with the answer to this nane. And it's a little bit of a ololo kuku is something on the va. Anybody want to drop their guesses in the chat? It really would make more sense if I could show you this slide in between, but I'm not even sure why it doesn't let me show that to you. Hanaho, one more time. Pepe yao, pea. Oh, ma'alili. Ma'alili o kiawe.
It might benefit if you explain the protocol. Somebody launching the riddle with the answer for the editor to know, right? And then
Yeah.
there.
Kalamai kumwai. I don't know if it's just me, but your voice is sounding like it's coming through a wind tunnel.
Just explain the protocols of nane.
Okay, so our I'm sorry, this is the slide that comes after here, and this is Kalokuokamaile attempting to actually get a riddle. And so I just wanted to highlight that the editor actually has to initiate whether or not the answer is right. And so after every nane that is published, it's like a flex from the editor of the newspaper saying, oh yeah, I get something here. I'm going to show you my Hobari skill. Also, I think tangentially related is some of these different other players of nane. I think like Sayonala would definitely be some pen name that I would use. I think that's like Kuikumana. Anyway, we're going to try to go back to this nane. Does anybody have a mana'o for this? Kokokelo kiave. Okay, we're going to stop and then I'll show you the answer because we'll understand it. So this is what he writes. The la'au o pe'ava. After some dialogue and exchange, the writers of the nane writers of the Kuoko ask Kalokuokamaile to give the answer to his riddle, and his answer is this: the o pe'a canoe boom. Why does it go with man? For that reason there. Oh yeah, no. Mahalo nui. Ya okoiko lohe anamai.
I really like the way you guys broke that all up and sectioned it off. And this time you each got a section around the same periods. So not just one is working in just one period. That was so cool. And yeah, that's masterful to take into Kipapa. So your job, Aolani. Yes. Okay. Anybody have questions?
Why did he have so many names?
Team?
Well, I don't know exactly why he had so many names, but one thing that is interesting is that he has a certain name for during certain years, and as he gets older, he kind of starts to go by a different pen name, and in particular years, sometimes it seems like when he's writing related to particular contexts, he'll use a particular name. In other contexts, he might use a particular name, and so. I'm not so sure. Maybe one guess is just that when he's in his riddling, he's known more. He'll use this pen name a little bit more, or through the pen names too. It's kind of a it's not really a way of bragging, but almost like a it's a kind of a smooth. You know how I don't know how to describe it, but it seems like the pen name is kind of a
Swag.
almost like a
It's
yeah
swag.
yeah
It's
swag.
the old school swag.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I
But it's
think
a
like,
beautiful way of doing it though.
yeah, I think he liked being elusive because he's super social, and he writes about all these experiences he's having with the church people and then with his friends. But I think he likes to be elusive in each of these groups. So some of them are aware that he's writing maybe under one particular name, but not other names. So I think he likes having conversations where they don't know that he's the guy that's writing that, but then it enters the conversation. I think he likes that kind of like getting that one up on other people where you don't know who wrote it, but he's really the guy sitting in the room having the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you folks try to correlate his names and the content of what he's writing under each name?
I was starting to do that just a little bit. So definitely the ka'au and the mo'olelo, depending on which ka'au, it's interesting that the kakao ia e kawaiko mai ka mako o ka opua appears to be things that are either reprinted or like recasted. He's known in the Nane world as Kikeiki o ka palikapu o ke ua. Kapuna Hu'ula appears a few times as like for some of the ka'au. And then I forget which article it is, but somebody had thought that he was Hapo ke Kalaunu, but we haven't found anything that proves that he was Hapo ke Kalaunu. But the Hapo ke Kalaunu was another riddler that Kalokuokamaile was engaging with in the Ku'oko'a.
Oh. Nice.
Did my mic come back on?
Yes, you're good. You're good. Go ahead.
I was asking Kaliko to clarify that when someone submitted a nane to the newspaper, they gave the answer to the editor, so that the editor would be the arbiter of whether someone had given the proper answer or not, so that the Riddler didn't have to participate every week as a follow-up. The Riddler would provide a prize, but when the editor declared a winner, then that person would get the prize. That was the background of those, and some went for a year with many answers all the time, many wrong answers, of course.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody else's questions? Mana'o? Okay. Thank you. That was really, really enjoyable. Mahalo nui.
Yeah.
Good job. Good job.